Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us for this, the launch of the final report of the Electricity Network Transformation Roadmap between CSIRO and Energy Networks Australia. It's John Bradley speaking, the CEO of Energy Networks Australia, and with us online we also have Paul Graham, the Chief Economist from CSIRO's Energy Group, and other members of our program team. I hope everybody has managed to navigate their way to the webinar. You'll notice, for those of you experiencing any difficulty hearing the sound on your computer, that we've put up a teleconference dial-in number if there's any issues for you there. You'll find that in the comments column on the left-hand side of the webinar. So this webinar today is the culmination of a two-year work program that's involved stakeholders across the energy supply chain, across the range of government bodies and energy consumer advocates, new market entrants, and very diverse participants in workshops and other processes that we've relied on. So I want to start by thanking people for joining us today. What we'll be doing in terms of the approach to the webinar is stepping through a few key sections of the agenda. We'll start off by a summary of roadmap findings and a refresher around the final conclusions of the roadmap there. We'll turn to the kind of key areas of feedback we received in the consultation that we've undertaken since the release of the Key Concepts report in December, and how that influenced changes in the final report. We'll be talking about the new content and the insights that came from further review of the energy system modelling undertaken by CSIRO and our partners in the process. And then we'll turn to next steps and the priority activities that we'll be undertaking as part of the most important aspect of this work program, its implementation. Will be plenty of time for questions and discussion from you and feedback from you during the webinar. Given the number of people we've got online with us, we've had to do it as a comments format, so you can give a comment box, so you can provide your questions to us in the comment box column that you'll see on the left-hand side of the webinar. And we've got about just over 500 registrants for the webinar today, and that's one of the reasons why I've needed to use that approach. We'll be stopping for questions and to try and address those questions at the end of each of those key sections as we work our way through the agenda today. And we'll try and address those as we go. So with that, we'll turn now to the background to the roadmap report. I apologise at the outset for those of you that have been heavily involved in the process that some of this will be very familiar to you, but because of the number of registrants we've got, we will spend some time covering a bit of the context at the outset, but there'll be plenty of new information to hold your interest, so bear with us. For those of you that haven't been close to it, the program we've been undertaking with the CSIRO, this roadmap program was built on the back of the Future Grid Forum work that CSIRO did in a really leading way with a really broad ecosystem of stakeholders to establish 4 potential future scenarios. And when that was completed in 2014, we began talking with the CSIRO about how to establish an action plan, if you like, to navigate the pathway over the next decade in the best possible way to achieve better outcomes for customers and establish a system that was more resilient to the potential futures. We knew from the work of the Future Grid Forum that no one could predict or even or certainly not control which energy future we were likely to head towards, given the kind of range of uncertainties of technology costs and customer choices that are involved in this new system. But also we knew that some future outcomes would be better than others. So this roadmap process that we've been undertaking over the past 2 years has been a partnership with the CSIRO, recognising its expertise, but also its role as a national science agency in bringing together broad stakeholders to analyse key issues facing industry issues of national importance in terms of the delivery of services to customers. We've tried to take an evidence-based approach throughout the program and establish an information base that people can interact with, people can draw their own conclusions about, but it's an open information base where we're transparent about the assumptions we've made about energy system trends and customer responses, and we've provided both quantitative analysis and also qualitative assessments using the best external experts we can. The work program is intended to deliver a clear action plan in the form of a roadmap of activities to be undertaken over the next 10-year period to 2027. So that's why you see within the roadmap report that's been released today this structure of milestones, key outcomes, if you like, that need to be delivered by a particular time frame, and supporting actions to actually achieve those milestones. And that's the roadmap structure we've adopted throughout the 5 dimensions or domains that we've used in this roadmap program. Throughout the work program, it's all been focused on trying to achieve balanced outcomes for customers and the broader society. And I'll turn now to talking about the way we've conceptualised those customer outcomes. Anyone watching the Australian energy debate in the last 12 months is certainly very familiar now with the phrase the trilemma, the energy trilemma, where we're trying to balance energy security, affordability and sustainability. And to some extent, the outcomes that we identified as being the key focus for the roadmap, those customer outcomes, really reflect the trilemma, as you see the focus on lower bills for valued services, the focus on safety, reliability and security of electricity supply, and the focus on the clean energy transition that customers expect us to achieve between industry and government. But there's also this new dimension around customer choice and control that has become a critical area of focus when we're in this much more decentralised electricity system where customers will determine investments or expenditure of over $200 billion between now and 2050. We can't command and control the electricity system in that environment, and so customer choice and enabling customer choices and new uses of the grid was a key imperative of the roadmap, as was managing the consequences of that new choice environment for fairness and equity amongst the customer base, and also the incentives that are provided to reward investment decisions by market participants and behavioural choices that they make. So they're the key 5 aspects of customer outcomes that we've used to anchor the program. And when you think about where we started from, we obviously had an electricity system in which we've seen significant increases in retail bills since 2008, much of that driven by changes in network costs, and there's an opportunity through the roadmap to significantly address the optimisation of network expenditure. We've also seen the emergence of some concerns about cross-subsidies and inequity between customers, as you've seen the increasingly diverse uses of the network resulting in different bill outcomes for customers based on how they're using technology at their home or in their commercial environment, without sufficient incentives for the smart use of technology to be rewarded. We've also seen the emergence of system security and stability challenges, while also facing the highest per capita emissions targets of almost any jurisdiction anywhere in the world, with a sector that's been highly reliant on fossil fuels, particularly coal. So that's where we start from. The roadmap looks forward and says out to 2050, there is the capacity for us to achieve a system which sees enormous change in the level of customer choice and control, with almost 2/3 of customers having distributed energy resources like solar or batteries or electric vehicles or participants in demand response platforms. But where you also might see customers that have almost got the ability to totally self-supply being rewarded with incentives to stay on the grid through something like a standalone power system tariff. So new products being offered to customers to recognise the capability they'll have in their on-site resources. But there'll be a need for customer protection frameworks and concession schemes to be fit for purpose. If we get the roadmap measures right, we get that balanced set of actions by industry and government, then there's the capacity to reduce the total system expenditure by $100 billion by 2050. And that means average household savings of $400 or more per year on average for households, and network charges which are about 30% lower than they are today. But importantly, beneath those average outcomes, one of the key considerations is the equity of outcomes across customers that are relatively passive compared to those that are relatively active in their adoption of new choices in energy. And so for an average or mid-sized family without distributed energy resources, the benefit could be worth $600 per year in terms of the lower bill that they would face for electricity costs by 2050. But also the incentives aspect of this objective is something which we highlight. So networks in the future using or drawing on those distributed energy resources could see new markets being animated where customers or their agents are effectively receiving about $2.5 billion per year by the end of the period for grid support services being provided through their on-site assets like solar storage, electric vehicle output or demand response platforms. In terms of safety, reliability and security, a key aspect of the roadmap is managing this transition while dealing with the real-time operational challenges that come from fundamental changes in the location and nature of energy sources. So a lot more distributed energy and a lot more intermittency and the loss of synchronous generation. And so the roadmap seeks to address those issues, building on the work that's being done by key institutions like the AEMC and AEMO. Lastly, in terms of that key customer objective of the clean energy transition, the roadmap sets the objective of achieving zero net emissions by 2050 in line with the aspiration of national governments at Paris in the COP21 meeting to achieve zero net emissions by the second half of the century. And so it's a very significant set of objectives, as you will obviously understand, and the key message, I guess, for us as we've undertaken the roadmap program is that those outcomes can be achieved. We can keep the lights on, bills affordable, and achieve deep decarbonisation, provided there is a very clearly managed transition plan in place. And this is consistent with a lot of the messages that have come from other stakeholders, and of course we've reflected that through their participation in our process. If I turn now to this brief overview of what are the key kind of components of the roadmap elements, you'll see that we've structured it according to 5 themes or swim lanes in this graphic: customer-oriented electricity, power system security, carbon abatement, incentives and network regulation, and intelligent networks and markets. And the roadmap sets out a program for the next decade which identifies the really significant measures that need to be undertaken by industry, or in some cases by government or other stakeholders, usually working together to achieve those milestones by a particular time frame. What you'll see as you review the roadmap report, which is released on our website, is that many of these areas of activity require action early in the decade in order to position the electricity system to be resilient to the kind of transformation that's happening with customer take-up of new technology. Because I think we're all kind of aware that at the moment we see areas of the electricity system, both at high voltage and low voltage levels, where the technology and customer activity is outpacing the system's response and the regulatory response. So in terms of that first theme around customer-oriented electricity, there are some key measures there related to not only the way in which our sector, the network sector, manages customer engagement and collaboration with customers in terms of the planning of the network, involvement in network decisions and decision making, the shape of future network tariffs and incentive regimes, but also the level of customer involvement that occurs between networks and customers in addressing new service opportunities that come from the digitalisation of the electricity system. So we're already seeing service innovation occurring by not only networks and traditional retailers and service providers, but new market entrants coming in and offering customers simple and easy to adopt tools that help them take control of their energy use. We think that as part of this network transformation roadmap, networks making that information available, providing the information to the market will be a key contribution to animating market activity, and that's a key part of our activities there in that first set of objectives. In relation to power system security, the roadmap identifies the work that's going on at the moment around key frameworks for system security measures, including inertia services and fast frequency response and new forms of ancillary services that need to be established in a timely way in order to recognise the system's requirement for those services to maintain system security. And so the roadmap acknowledges that set of work, and also for networks recognises the need for networks to undertake a more active role in managing that system security issue in a way that supports the market operator. So you'll see within this part of the roadmap a focus on making transparent to the market operator the developments of distributed energy resources on the network, where those distributed energy resources are, and helping the market operator to better understand and forecast the outcomes from that take-up of distributed energy resource. Turning to carbon abatement, this is obviously an area that's got significant public focus, but it's also an essential limb of the roadmap. And so as part of this work with CSIRO, we've reviewed the outcomes that are needed to achieve deep decarbonisation, both under current and national abatement targets and also the long-term objective out to 2050. And the roadmap sets out recommendations of the need for stable and enduring carbon policy, outcome-based carbon policy rather than carbon policy that identifies particular outcomes or outcomes for particular technologies like renewable energy technologies, but instead focuses on a carbon abatement outcome and allows a competition to occur to achieve those targets. It also identifies the need for progress in relation to vehicle emission standards and some recommendations there about further review of the abatement target in a managed orderly transition. In relation to incentives and network regulation, this was a key focus of our work using CSIRO's modelling capacity and also the work of Energia in relation to the ways that customers would take up new technology and use new technology given particular incentives. And this has underpinned the work that we've produced in the roadmap that finds significant benefits, potential benefits of $16 billion in network savings that can be achieved between now and 2050 if we rely on the integrated use of those resources. But to do that, the roadmap sets out a program that relies on progress by 2021 on cost-reflective network tariffs at a universal level for network charges, and that provides the base then for more differentiated incentives to be provided for the use of distributed energy resources in the right place at the right time in the grid. And there's a range of opportunities to make use of those distributed energy resources. It might be a critical peak price program or a peak time rebate program being offered by a network business in the form of a tariff or pricing product. It could also be aggregators coming into the market and using either demand response platforms or virtual power plants using distributed batteries to help to aggregate demand response or battery dispatch to support the grid at key times. So there's a range of ways in which we can animate those markets. If we get it right, then there's the potential for significant benefits to be achieved through that innovation and incentives. Turning to intelligent networks in the market, there's a significant discussion within this roadmap report and significant recommendations in relation to new capabilities that will be required in the grid, including the ability to have better sensing and awareness of the distributed energy resources that are on the grid, and that's going to require obviously smart grid technologies and the intelligent use of big data analytics to assess the contribution of those resources, but also their challenges that they create for system operation as we start to see high penetration of distributed energy resources leading to reverse flows in parts of the network or challenges in power quality and reliability. But also in relation to this area, we'll see the need for hosting capacity analysis that's already being developed in some networks in Australia and is a focus in European markets, particularly in the UK, where we start to look at those areas where congestion within the network may be starting to limit the ability to connect and dispatch distributed energy resources. The roadmap is a plan for networks to be very active managers of those operational challenges, so we're removing the blockages to the full utilisation of distributed energy resources on the system. So with that very high-level overview of the roadmap program, you'll see that within the report that it adopts something like a Gantt chart approach to set out outcomes that need to be achieved by particular timeframes. And if we get that set of measures right, then to sort of highlight those benefits, you're seeing a contribution to average residential bills under the roadmap scenario that are $414 per year, lower than they'll otherwise be by 2050. And that's a contribution of both the network optimisation achieved through pricing and incentive reform, but also more efficient utilisation of the existing capacity on the system and the introduction and encouragement of electric vehicles and electrification of transport. By 2027, you'll see the bill differences on average are quite small, quite modest. That's within the next decade, the average bill outcome is quite modest. But it's that progress that we make in the critical decade between now and 2027 that allows those long-term outcomes to emerge through the incentives we establish between now and 2027. It's also an average outcome which is probably hiding benefits that are being achieved through the avoidance of significant changes in cross-subsidies between customer segments. As you can see in the pie charts on this slide, the roadmap also summarises the key areas where you're achieving that efficiency in the energy system expenditure of $101 billion. And it is diversely spread across network infrastructure and also optimisation of centralised generation and avoiding customers leaving the grid. The charts aren't showing remotely, that's it. Apologies, I'm just being advised that you're having trouble seeing the charts remotely, so I'm hoping that you can pick up the reference to the chart and find that in the materials on our website during the course of the day. So apologies if that's hard to read on your screen. Just to come now to the outcomes for customer segments, we did undertake segment analysis below the average level because what we know is the uses of the grid are increasingly diverse, and some customers will be more passive than others as we go through this transformation journey. And that gives us the ability to identify the difference in customer outcomes across working couples or a medium family scenario, a large family scenario, or a single retired person. And that tells us that all customer cohorts are better off in that environment, but also the passive customers under the roadmap scenario are going to be substantially better off if we can address through pricing and incentive reform those cross-subsidies that will otherwise emerge. And for that medium-sized family, that's a benefit of about $600 per year to the bill outcome for a family that doesn't take up distributed energy resources or engage in the market. So I'm just moving on now to the supporting report library. I won't dwell on this, but one of the key things we wanted to achieve with this roadmap work program was produce that evidence base that provided an information platform that all parties could use, and that's all available on our website. These reports that have been produced, 19 different reports using expert consultancies, are all available, and we hope provide some interest to people that are close to these issues and interested in progressing this important area of reform. I think we've probably recognised at the outset of the webinar that we've involved significant numbers of stakeholder representatives through this process. I wanted to thank the 200 separate industry representatives who attended our 14 workshops and webinars as part of the program. We know that there's been roadmap material accessed about 30,000 times in terms of the amount of access of the website material that's occurred during the program. So it's been a very interactive process, and the level of participation we have today probably echoed that. And that's probably a good point at which I should hand over to Paul Graham, who will take us through the feedback that was received during the consultation period. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, yeah, and I'll just get into this section, and then we might stop and pick up a couple of the questions that have come through. So obviously we released the key concepts report in December, and then we're looking for some indication from all the stakeholders about, whether we got it right, whether there was anything we could do better. And that process had some element of passive, email us if you've got a comment to make. We also did go out and we actually went to every state during February and March and actively sought out to give people briefings and to get their reactions. So it was about 30 briefings and 300 people covered in those. And then also there was lots of sort of informal interactions as well. After all those conversations, the sort of overwhelming feedback that we got was that it was fairly constructive and positive about the roadmap content. But there were some changes that we thought would be important to make and would improve the roadmap. So that's what I'm going to take you through in this next 10 minutes. So this slide is just a quick listing of all the things that we thought were really good feedback and that we have included. And what we actually have on the ENA website is a more extended discussion about what that feedback was and how we dealt with it, just in a sort of an 8-page document. What I'm going to do is pick out about 3 of these topics and just talk you through them just by way of example. But if you are interested in some of these other topics, you'll find some discussion on that on the website. So the first thing I want to talk about is pricing. There was we received general feedback that sort of by omission or absence of comments on the role of retailers, that we were sort of leaving other people to fill the picture in. So and by doing that, there was probably the feeling that we hadn't given enough thought to what role retailers would play. But I guess so what we've tried to do is clarify that, and I suppose the bottom line is that we see retailers playing a pretty critical role. This diagram that we're showing at the moment, is sort of a generalised way about that sort of shows how retail electricity bills are constructed now. Retailers sort of combine the pricing, in some cases quite complicated pricing they get from the generation sector, and a fairly simple price at the moment from the network sector. They package that up into a retail price, and they pass that through to the customer who may or may not have distributed energy resources. And those prices generally aren't particularly well targeted at people who have distributed energy resources. It's fairly one size fits all. If we go through the next slide, the detail we've put in the roadmap now is to really explain our position, which is that, as I said, retailers have a key role to play in tariff reform, and we actually think that they should be given the space to really develop and innovate the sort of custom-facing price structures that we'll need in the future. Networks need to change their prices, but retailers will have their own view about what should be facing customers, and that they might want to think about bundling some of those tariffs with other services. They'll also make a judgment about whether customers want to face a simpler tariff than the sort of pricing that they'll face from the generation and network markets as they evolve. So we've made that clearer, and maybe this diagram is a little bit complicated. It really just shows that retailers will be taking probably a more nuanced pricing signal from both the generation and the network markets. As I said, they'll be making their own judgments about what the customer sees and the best way to package that up for both owners of distributed energy who may or may not want a retail package versus directly interacting with the grid. There was some more feedback on price reform. One of the we did have some stakeholders talk about how challenging the pace of the price reform was that we were laying out, but actually and that was our expectation, but we also had a lot of stakeholders saying that we probably weren't moving quickly enough, obviously because the technology is moving so fast. The judgment that we made in the end was that the timing is probably still about right in the roadmap. It fits in with the current price reform process that's in place. Gives time for everyone to get used to new structures. So we haven't changed the timing of that milestone, but we take some of those comments as encouragement that there is a bit more appetite to get that process moving as quickly and smoothly as possible. The second point was that we found that there wasn't a really obvious understanding of some of the constraints that networks faced in terms of understanding and being able to provide a spatial constraint signal around their network. The visibility in terms of understanding what is the load quite far down in the low voltage network just isn't there at the moment because there hasn't been a need to sort of measure those issues. So that will take some time, and that's another part of the reason why the price reform needs to happen within that framework. Timing. The final point is that because we'd sort of used this phrase demand-based tariffs almost exclusively in the roadmap, there was an impression that that was the only pricing structure that might be adopted by networks in the future. And that certainly is the case in terms of the sort of shorter term price evolution. Most networks are thinking about demand-based tariffs, but it's certainly not the only structure that is being considered, and those will evolve over time. So we've just fixed up the language in the report to just allow for that more nuanced approach to the sort of structures that networks are talking about. So the next topic we found that we needed to clarify was really around, obviously it's really around, are we avoiding, what sort of network expenditure are we avoiding? And the misunderstanding that we found when we went out to talk to stakeholders was that we had tended to use this sort of talked about avoided network expenditure, and we'd probably used the phrase augmentation a few too many times in the report. So people assumed that we were saying there was a lot of augmentation expenditure being avoided, but that's obviously not the case. The network, a lot of the networks around the country face a fairly flat peak demand outlook, and some of them have just finished quite substantial building programs. So actually, in the sort of shorter term, the real opportunity is probably around essentially reducing replacement expenditure, so potentially including building back smaller. And then over the longer term, as peak demand starts to increase again, there will be that mix of avoided both augmentation and replacement expenditure. As you see in the chart there, which has already been published, but we perhaps hadn't highlighted enough. So that's something we've just checked our language in the report to make sure we're not giving the wrong impression there. So the next topic is carbon policy, which John mentioned, and obviously when we released the draft report in December, it was during a time where there was quite heightened political environment around emissions and emissions policy. What we discovered sort of after we'd finished the draft report last year was that the government is no longer interested in an emission intensity scheme. Obviously our report, on the other hand, which is focused on minimising bills for customers, does zero in on an emission intensity scheme for that reason, because all the available modelling still finds that that is the most effective way to do that. So where does that leave the final roadmap report? We still, because our goal is to minimise bills for customers, we still do recommend, if you want to do that, then an emission intensity scheme is the best way to do that. But on the other hand, we have to be realistic, and we recognise that if a consensus can't emerge around that particular policy approach, then what we need to do then is focus on the next best approach. And what we've done is tried to set out the principles. So the principles are that, you know, alternative approach should be stable, should be technology neutral, and keep costs low for customers. So as I said, there is a longer description of this sort of feedback and how we've dealt with it on the Energy Network site, and that's the link there. So what we might do before we go on to the modelling section now is just go back and check over these questions that people have started to type in, and start with the first one, John, I think is for you. What happens if a carbon framework is not adopted by government?
Yeah, look, I think to some extent your coverage there, Paul, of the approach we took to the final position on carbon policy is relevant to that question. We did do a comparative analysis of different carbon policy options through the roadmap program. There was some work done by Jacobs for us that is produced as a standalone report. You'll find that in that library that's on our website, that compared 3 different carbon policy options, including an extension of business as usual, if you like, based on the renewable energy target and what is effectively a tightening of the safeguards mechanism, including an assessment of an emission intensity scheme, and including an assessment of an explicit carbon price. And that analysis found, as Paul said, that the best outcome for customer bills was going to be delivered through an emission intensity scheme with savings in customer bills of approximately $200 per year in the period between 2020 and 2030. But the real lesson from that analysis, and it's reflected in the assessment of the carbon price option, it's been reflected in other work around options like low emission target frameworks. The real lesson is that outcome-based carbon policy that allows the technology competition to occur is likely to deliver the least cost options for customers. So that's That probably gives us the answer to the question, what happens if carbon abatement framework is not adopted by government? We know that there will be higher cost outcomes for customers if we don't have stable and enduring carbon policy. We know that it's likely to increase the risk of an insecure energy transition if we don't see state and federal governments working together to try and create a national framework. And it is as much a conclusion about the way state and federal government policy is integrated as it is about the need for bipartisanship, I think. Thanks, Paul. We might go on to the next question, which I think was one for you, Paul. And the question there from Joe E was, I don't understand why the passive customer groups do better than the active ones. Paul, are you happy to take that?
Yeah, the quick answer is that, and maybe we need to just define here what we mean by active and passive. We said that passive customers are customers that, for whatever reason, and this is, I've gone back to the slide here, whatever reason, passive customers are those that can't access distributed energy. One of the main reasons why they may not be able to do that is if they're renting. It obviously makes it more complicated to install equipment at a house if you're renting. An active customer is one who always takes up distributed energy. What we find in the future, whether you're in our roadmap or the alternative counterfactual, is that you're always better off taking up distributed energy in the long run, just because the cost of the technology will be so low relative to the grid price. So passive customers are actually worse off, is our expectation. But what we want to do is create a roadmap where, although we can't necessarily do anything about people's individual circumstances and access to distributed energy, we can at least create a roadmap where people are better off under the roadmap, whether they are active or passive, and that's what we do achieve across those representative groups. As you'll see, there's always an improvement under the roadmap, no matter what customer type you are. And then, but we've actually also narrowed the gap between active and passive customers by reducing those cross subsidies as part of the price reform process. We think that's the best outcome for everyone. But it is true to say that people who can't access distributed energy will pay higher bills, just through virtue of the fact that the distributed energy technology is cheaper. Back to you for the next one, John.
Thanks, Paul. And for those of you watching the comments, this one's a bit long, so I'll read it out, but you'll find it on your comment box at 11:34 from Emil. The question was, does your analysis lead you to conclude that the centrally dispatched wholesale clearing markets model should be changed to physically delivered nodal pricing markets, in brackets both capacity and energy throughput, similar to PJM markets in the US? Wouldn't this better facilitate markets to price all of the different products and services across both generation and network? So I take that to be a question about whether or not the analysis leads us to a conclusion that we should move from centrally dispatched wholesale clearing markets to nodal pricing markets for capacity and energy. One of the key things we've grappled with as we were doing the roadmap was to what extent you need to take a view about the potential for more nodal markets or distributed energy markets to emerge. And there's a lot of work going on, particularly in the US, that we're aware of in transactive energy, looking at the potential for effectively a market operator like AEMO to be managing a dispatch process, or to have an automated process for managing a dispatch process at distributed scales at lower levels in the grid, potentially right down to precinct scale optimization of distributed energy markets. So these are really significant system changes that would be required, and they would see fundamental changes to the NEM in order to be implemented. To be honest with you, as we assess these issues and where Australia's at the moment in terms of what are the key drivers for our transformation with our focus on those key customer outcomes, we took the view that the most important thing for our part of the supply chain was for us to move to an ability to actually value distributed energy resources locationally in the network and to make that available. And so if you're reading the roadmap report and you're looking at this discussion of the network optimization market, That's effectively the networks making available to market participants the potential saving that can be achieved if we can draw on those distributed energy resources, and that helps send a signal to customers about the investment decisions they make. It helps to create a market opportunity for aggregators and new providers of new services from the network signal that's there. So we've laid out a plan, a 10-year plan within the roadmap that would see the potential for an assessment of effectively a digital platform for new markets by the end of the decade, and proposes a cost-benefit analysis should be done at the end of the decade. And we signal in the roadmap that that could also be something that assesses whether or not you considered a different model altogether of distributed energy markets if they've proven up and got to the point where they're a viable option. But we know now that these actions we recommended around making transparent the cost of the network and the value of distributed energy resources at locational levels within the network, that's all a no-regrets activity that would support those future distributed energy market options if you decided that that was, in the future, a better option to pursue. Apologies for the length of time taken on that question. I think the next question comes from Con, asking if we have a plan to get a quicker transition to demand tariffs given the opt-in approach which is being adopted in many jurisdictions. The short answer to that is that what the roadmap really highlights is the significant benefits if we achieve an earlier transition to cost-reflective network tariffs, and the need to do that by 2021 because of the way in which current network tariff structures are inducing different choices about the take-up of distributed energy resources and baking in cross-subsidies between customers. And given the pace at which we could see solar PV increase by the end of the decade, for that reason, we've recommended very clearly that we need to move to opt-out approaches, and we've identified in the roadmap analysis that if you do move to opt-out approaches, you can keep a framework where customers keep choice to go back to the default tariff, but you will still see about 80% at least of customers remaining in that new cost-reflective tariff structure that we all know is fairer and more efficient. So a key message from the roadmap is that we'll need networks to be active in reforming tariffs. We know that the Australian Energy Regulator is actively encouraging the assessment of fairer and more efficient tariffs through their most recent decisions on tariff structure statements, and we'll need governments to support that reform because of the long-term benefits to customers, including the most vulnerable customers. We've probably got time for just two more questions in this section. We've got a question from Timothy G, which asks, in relation to the ORGEX-REPEX analysis, has there been substantive work on the associated OPEX works? I think the best thing for that one is perhaps if I direct you to our website where the Energia report is that assess those options around ORGEX and REPEX and the consequences from different tariff reform options. And you could use that to then follow up in questions to us here at the Energy Networks Australia and CSIRO. We're happy to talk offline about that. Then finally, and Paul, you might be able to provide comment on this, from Steve L. Are there opportunities to use the transformation process to develop new industrial sectors in Australia? If so, what would need to be done to facilitate this, as opposed to just importing all technologies or replicating businesses developed elsewhere? Paul, have you got a view on that one?
Well, industrial power is hard because essentially industrial power is really drawn straight from the generation sector, and so you can't sort of cover an aluminium smelter in rooftop panels to supply their power. You really need large bulk power, and I guess the opportunity that we're saying is here for the roadmap is that we can keep those bulk power supplies down, the cost of those bulk power supplies down, by doing demand management through the distribution sector, rather than sort of duplicating more assets up in the generation sector. So I think that's the key cost savings. If we're talking about non-industrial though, certainly what we're seeing in Australia is a bit of a trend towards new developments, whether it's housing or commercial precincts, really looking to start to build in solar and storage and those other technologies, essentially their own power suppliers, because there are cost savings to be made, and that new housing development or precinct can take those cost savings and build that into the cost structure of their businesses or their household bills. With that one, I might jump into the modelling section, just for the sake of time, and we can try and come back to as many of these as we can.
Paul, just to maybe just elaborate on that, to give people some comfort, we will, any questions we don't get through today, and we'll try and mop them up at the end, we will produce a written response to and put on our website after the webinar early next week. Thanks, Paul.
So as we were going around the country, one of the sort of constant conversations we're having with people in different states was trying to understand how the sort of national modelling that we had presented relates to their state and their particular state circumstances. And it happened that we had actually done all the modelling at a state level and actually below the state. We'd done a lot of substation level analysis. We'd broken Australia up into just under 2,000 substations. So we actually had a lot of regional modelling, which we didn't want to put into the December report because it might have been a bit distracting at that stage, but we've now created an appendix in this final report to provide a bit more of a flavour of how states' circumstances change throughout as the national story unfolds. I guess one of the key implications of what we see when we look at the state results is that there is quite a diversity in the sorts of how quickly the transition happens in each state and the different opportunities. And the implication of that is that we've probably been much clearer in the final report that we want to recognise that the diversity of the state results means that some of the roadmap milestones and actions and the timing of those really need to be considered within the context of the region in which they're implemented. So some states will have to move quicker on some issues than others, and that extra nuance needs to be considered when looking at the milestones. To show you some examples of that, we've plotted things like renewables and battery uptake and a number of other things to kind of show how the different states how the results differ. This one is a chart of the renewable share, and obviously our national implementation of the generation solution to reach zero emissions was very renewable heavy, and so all the states actually get to 100% renewables by 2050, but they do that at different times. And a couple of the key findings we had as we looked at this was that South Australia is obviously a leader at the moment, but we expect Victoria, because of its local target, will move to 40% quite quickly in 2025. And then New South Wales and Queensland have quite heavy building programs in the 2030s and 2040s. And some of that construction is quite significant. We're looking at maybe having to build 5 gigawatts. That's equivalent of something like 25 200 megawatt solar or wind farms in that 5-year period. And so they'll need really clear, we assume that there are available really clear policy signals to make that happen. Moving on, the other thing was that because each state has very high renewables, we had to think very carefully and really do our sums and numbers around how do you actually each of those states manage that variable renewable supply and still balance supply and demand. We had to do a lot of simulations, and these two charts give you a flavour of the sort of simulations we had to run to try and figure out, well, if you're going to have all that variable renewables, how many batteries do you need? The chart on the left really shows that up to about 30 to sort of 50% renewable penetration, most of the states can just rely on their existing flexible generation. They don't really need batteries up to that point. But beyond that point, we definitely saw a need. The modelling was telling us we needed batteries to help balance supply and demand. And the trend that emerged was that by 2050, we needed to install batteries at a rate of 1 gigawatt of batteries for each gigawatt of renewables. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is the chart on the right, where what we found was that we needed to install batteries to cover initially a few hours, but by 2050 to cover about 8 hours of average state load. And where we were finding simulations where we did more than that, we found it wasn't cost effective. Beyond about 8 hours, it was much more cost effective to use gas peaking plant for most of the projection, and then switching to biogas towards the end as we head towards zero emissions. So we saw peaking plant as playing a really important role alongside battery storage, or indeed it could be pumped hydro storage, either way. Keeping moving, we did all of that analysis to be conservative. We didn't allow any growth in state interconnectors. We wanted to make sure we had a really robust system where states could more or less island themselves and still have no trouble balancing demand. But our message there isn't that state interconnectors are not important. We actually think they're important. We wanted to just do a little bit of analysis to highlight why we think they're important. What this chart here really just shows is a sample, using a sample year, we looked at the 4 major states in the NEM and looked at whether during their peaking events it would be advantageous for them to be connected to another state. And you can see there on the summer days in Victoria and Queensland, there are better wind supplies in the evening and night in New South Wales and South Australia in this example. So obviously a benefit to Queensland and Victoria to be connected to New South Wales and South Australia. And then on the winter peaking days in New South Wales and South Australia, there's actually some benefit in the reverse, which is being connected to Victoria and Queensland and South Australia. So that really just highlights for us that there's kind of an obvious diversity advantage in having more connections between states. We've also presented the development of an installation of rooftop solar and on-site battery storage by state. The trends really do reflect population and rooftop availability in the states. And you'll see that they look very similar, and that just reflects the fact that we found that this option of bundling solar and storage would probably become the kind of dominant distributed energy package that customers would be taking up. The other thing to note is that, sorry, the one on the right should be gigawatt hours, by the way. The other thing to note is that we found that increasing in customer adoption was part of this, but another thing was we're seeing customers build larger systems and install larger systems, and that's an historical trend which we see also extending forward. The final point on the regional modelling that I wanted to make is we were also concerned about the fact that we hadn't done a lot of deep modelling on the stability of the system in the distribution sector. We kind of focused on stability in the generation sector, but we just didn't have within the scope of the project to do a lot of low voltage stability modelling. So we wanted to see what we could pull out of our substation modelling though to at least provide an indicator. What this map is really showing is an indicator of when we'd expect each of the substations to cross a threshold where during the year, they're probably experiencing a reverse power flow event, which is where you're getting more generation from rooftop solar in the substation than there is actually demand for electricity. And that tended to happen at this point where you had 40% rooftop solar capacity relative to the load in that substation. You'll see from this national chart that South Australia is really at that point now, or soon to be, and that's fairly consistent with AEMO's projections. It's a bit mixed in the other states, and just to zoom into one state, which is New South Wales, you'll see from this view that really there's an intensity of this in the populated areas, particularly in the capital city there in Sydney, where you've got people, you've got rooftop systems. But then even within the city, there is a bit of a mix. So you've got some areas where they'll cross the threshold in the 2020s, and then some areas where they'll cross it later. I guess the take-home message from that is that some of the strategies around getting ready to manage high distributed energy uptake will need to be a strategy that does that on a sort of substation level rather than necessarily the same strategy across the state. So we're going to shift now back into a Q&A session. And I think the next one was for me. Just going back through the questions now. So the next question was, roadmap outcomes, what are the dollar value savings in today's prices? So the easy answer to that is that throughout the roadmap report and all the numbers, all the figures are generally given in real terms. So we just model everything in real terms and explain everything in today's dollars just to make it simple. So anything that you find in the report, you can more or less assume is a real figure. Key savings, which John mentioned in his introduction, were that by taking advantage of this opportunity to use the distributed energy infrastructure to provide bill savings for customers, but also grid services back to the grid, we estimated savings of $100 billion relative to a roughly $1 trillion system that we'll need to maintain and build. So that's quite substantial. And the savings on an average residential customer's bill was about $400 by 2050 as well. Moving to the next question, it says, how are rural networks represented in the study? I guess this map partially answers that question. Going back to the main map here, we included every substation that we could get good data for. So some substations we had to leave out because maybe that substation represented a single consumer, so there were privacy issues, or maybe that substation had bad data. But of the sort of over 2,000 substations, we're able to include about 1,800, and a lot of those do include rural substations. And then in those substations, we're able to match up other Australian Bureau of Statistics data and other data to get a picture of what types of customers would be in that substation. So maybe it would be more heavier rural, might be more heavier residential and farm. So I think we're able to capture that quite well. And one of the things we do in the Energia analysis is really pick out the opportunities to do things differently on the edge of the grid. So one of the conclusions we reach about standalone power systems is that probably new connections that are further from the grid will probably be more cost effectively addressed by a standalone power system. And there might be some areas where the option to replace a power line for a smaller community could be done more cost effectively from a microgrid, although there would need to be some pricing changes to be able to recognise the value of that. So we're certainly worth having a look at the Energia report on microgrids to really look at those opportunities. John, I think the next one was for you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So the next question came from Keith, I think it's pronounced. Can you elaborate on the future role of the transmission network? And Paul, in a minute, I might ask you to kind of elaborate around the insights around the role of interconnection and the propensity for future benefits of interconnection, as we've been discussing recently. But in terms of the general role of the transmission network, it is, you can see as you read through the roadmap report, that this is a transformation that's happening at both ends of the system, both in terms of the significant changes in the take-up of non-synchronous generation and the increased use of intermittent renewables at large-scale sections of the grid, at high-voltage network, but also at the distribution level, that transformation happening through the significant connection of distributed resources. And the grid is likely to be much more actively managed and require sort of extra focus in key areas to support system security at both tiers, if you like. And for the transmission network, the roadmap identifies in this power system security section the need for probably a more active role and a closely collaborative role between transmission networks and the Australian Energy Market Operator in managing these new frameworks for system security, including system stability, as we see the change in the nature of the generation mix. And we've already seen, since the release of the Key Concepts report, new policy frameworks released by the Australian Energy Market Commission in relation to the role of transmission networks in securing minimum levels of inertia that are going to be identified by the Australian Energy Market Operator, but also the potential use for inertia markets and the stimulation of inertia markets as you see these new technologies, including just the use of synchronous condensers or using large-scale batteries or other technology options, providing new choices for how system stability is maintained and how changes of frequency are maintained at that high voltage grid level. So we've embraced, I guess, that view of transmission networks playing a more significant role in supporting system security, and in real time, I guess, in the last 12 months, there's been a lot of interaction between transmission networks and the Finkel review and collaboration with AEMO as they look to fulfil that role. But there'll also be significant disruption to the transmission business model as much as the distribution business model as they look to take up alternatives to traditional like-for-like replacement of transmission infrastructure and the use of distributed energy resources and non-network solutions as part of their activities. And we're starting to see forerunners of that, for instance, through Transgrid's program around Powering Sydney's Future, which is looking to build distributed energy markets, distributed demand response markets to help them avoid significant augmentations of infrastructure. So there's some of the key changes, but you'll find a lot more in the report. I think then, Paul, we've probably got time for just one or two more questions in this area. I'm scrolling down. Apologies for people while they wait for me to scroll down to the next question we've got. And it's marked to you, Paul, from Wayne G. Will batteries also help to manage reverse flow on the grid?
Yeah, that's a good point. And we, in the roadmap scenario, essentially we are part of what's happening in that roadmap scenario. So we're assuming that we have got that sort of coordination between batteries that are on site and embedded within the distribution sector. We're assuming that those are available to provide services to the distribution network. So if they're experiencing high solar output, which obviously starts to lead to problems like triggering higher voltage, then they can monitor that and potentially send a signal to essentially ask for more battery charging up, which would soak up some of that solar power. So that's certainly one of the ways we see dealing with that. Certainly, the alternative is not very good. The alternative is that during those times, we would see, if the voltage gets too high, we'd see inverters trip off and people's solar output collapse, which is not what customers want. So yeah, this roadmap is really about making sure we can use those those batteries that will be deployed, both for the customer's benefit and for the benefit of the grid as a whole. And so managing reverse power flow might be one of the ways to do that. And I could probably just quickly answer the next question, which was with regards to reverse flow, how was 40% determined to be the threshold at which reverse flow occurs? Was it based on observed reverse power flow events? What we did is, to do this map, we did a quick calculation on how long it would take to find reverse power flow events in every substation, and we found that it would take weeks to do that. So we had to do a quicker approach, which was that we took a sample of substations, saw when they generally resulted in reverse power flows, and we as I said, we found that that tended to happen when rooftop capacity was about 40% of load. And we use that as, if you like, the indicator of reverse power flow. So we have taken a bit of a shortcut, but we think that is reasonably robust for the sample that we took. Back to you, John.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul, and thanks everybody for your questions. Do feel free to keep them coming, and those that we can't get through or in the verbal response today, we'll be trying to pick up in a written response that we release next week for everybody. Just moving now, I guess, to the next steps and kind of implementation discussion. To some extent, we're giving you today a insight into our current thinking as we complete this roadmap program, and it is still an active area of discussion for us at Energy Networks Australia with our transmission and distribution businesses, and also in discussion with the CSIRO. But consistent with the rest of the roadmap process, we're probably bringing you in at the ground floor as we're working through our proposed approach to structuring and thinking about implementation. So with those comments, I guess, the general summary would be that we've obviously got a roadmap which sets out 45 milestones and 145 suggested actions to address them. When you think about the work that's already going on across the electricity system and all the different parties involved across industry and government, these things are, in many cases, quite manageable, but some will require confronting the need for early action in key areas. But the roadmap helps to sort of set out, if you like, the need for an integrated approach. And we're thinking about the implementation activities in three broad areas. There's areas where we'll need to see coordination across network businesses, particularly in terms of the changes we need to undertake and own as a sector. And they're things where you'll see, particularly our sector, working collectively in trying to progress those reforms or changes in a timely way, but in almost all cases working with other participants in the ecosystem, often retailers, but also government agencies, academic institutions and regulatory bodies. But there's a coordination activity in that kind of process. There's a set of activities that individual businesses will be delivering, and this is really what I think of as the iceberg below the water, where so much of the change that's spelled out in the roadmap is going to be delivered by businesses transforming their own business model and service delivery options and extending what's happening at the moment within many network businesses around Australia. You're already seeing really significant cultural changes occurring and significant new initiatives in most businesses, and we'll see an extension of that. And a lot of these roadmap activities that are set out are actually things that the network industry can progress without waiting for regulatory change or government policy issues to be addressed. A lot of these issues, such as the development of smarter grid capacity, the transformation of that grid intelligence capacity and the more active management of the network, these are things that you'll see businesses doing directly as part of their own initiatives and better services to customers. Finally, there's a set of activities here, and some of these we've kind of focused on today, which fall into the category of influenced implementation, where we can identify a roadmap that depends on these things happening in government circles and depends on action by government agencies or regulatory bodies, but in which we're only one party seeking to ensure timely action or progress in those areas. And I'll touch on some of these as we go through the next few slides. In terms of that last item, influence and implementation, the two kind of key areas to maybe focus on that we think are standouts are progressing this resolution of the carbon policy conflict that plagued us in Australia for the last few years. I think we all recognise the political challenges in that process, and we understand that governments have a legitimate need to represent their community, but we can also stand back and look at it from a national perspective and see the need for more clearly coordinated state and federal policies to achieve the carbon abatement outcomes. So that's one area, I guess, where with the stakeholders involved in the roadmap program, we think there's already a strong consensus to encourage support from governments for that change. Another one that might be less high profile at the moment is probably the need for quite rapid penetration of advanced metering or smart meters within the small customer base in order to provide the platform for better incentives to customers, which the roadmap relies on. And so you'll see within the roadmap quite explicit projections and modelling of what's needed to occur, where you'll see significant penetration of metering being required by 2021 to enable those cost-reflective network tariffs to be provided to customers and achieve those efficiency and fairness benefits. And so a key action there is monitoring the effectiveness of the current market-led rollout of smart metering and watching for the progress in terms of penetration rates of metering in the community. If that all works well, then that'll provide a fantastic base on which to achieve fairer and efficient incentives. But if we see progress of metering deployment stall, then this is an area we've recommended to policymakers that they'll need to closely watch because so much of the roadmap outcomes do depend on that technology layer providing a base for better incentives. In relation to network members of the ENA and what will occur within their businesses, some of the things we'd highlight there are the work that we'll see being undertaken within businesses about better customer engagement and, if you like, analysis of the customer base and segmentation of the customer base. And there's some work that we can build on there that we've undertaken with customer advocates around how to improve the validity of customer engagement approaches to make sure we are hearing the voice of customers clearly in our engagement about network planning, about network expenditure proposals and pricing reform. In relation to regulatory proposals to implement the roadmap measures, we're thinking here about the fact that these actions will require individual businesses to put forward new pricing reform proposals to the AER for approval, of course. We'll also need to see the kind of capability being developed in smart grid activities which allow us to have better sensing on the network and better management of hosting capacity, and that's going to require taking the regulator into that assessment and building confidence about that being an efficient response to the change that's happening on the system. You'll see changes to network system processes and changes in innovation frameworks within businesses and risk management. At the end of the day, a lot of these changes in the roadmap represent a kind of risk judgment that service providers will need to take with their customers about how the future will play out and how quickly technology will be adopted or customer preferences will change. And so it's really important that that's built on a kind of a clear risk-based framework for businesses and also active customer engagement. In terms of coordinated implementation, these are the things that we're probably most involved with at Energy Networks Australia. And we've been talking with our CEOs and board about a few key areas of activity. One will be identifying specific flagship projects that, if you like, represent some of the critical path for the roadmap in the early period, and making sure that we've got a coordinated approach across the sector to progressing those things that need to be done together by networks. Given that they operate in a national market, they're dealing with often retailers that are operating across the national framework, or they're dealing with a solar industry that wants to connect across multiple networks. Many of these reforms need a national approach. We'll be looking to establish a base for sharing demonstration projects and trials and contributing there to the really great work being done by ARENA and others in establishing information sharing across these new technologies as they're deployed, and building a more structured approach to research and development and innovation frameworks for the network industry in Australia. This is a long-term benefit, but it's something that should be considered given the pace of change in our sector. The fourth area of activity will be to keep the momentum of the roadmap and keep our transparency to key stakeholders. We'll be looking to try and produce regular implementation reports on progress against the roadmap milestones and continue to have that conversation about how the events are playing out within the sector and whether or not we need to rethink the timing or the actions that are being suggested within the roadmap through close industry engagement. On this next slide, and you will get a chance to review these after the webinar, there is a list here of our provisional thinking about what are the real flagship projects, those projects that represent the critical path, if you like, for implementation. And so the 11 projects listed here, I'll touch on in a little bit more detail, but they include things like progressing a distributed energy resource connection guideline and making sure that we've managed to streamline as much as possible across different networks, the connection process, and remove any unnecessary inconvenience to people trying to connect to the grid and do that in a predictable, efficient way. But there's a set of measures there that we've identified that come out of the roadmap milestones that we'll be looking at as, if you like, the iconic flagship projects that we'll focus on in the coming months. I'll come back in a moment to how we'll release further information about this implementation program in the months to come. To give you a bit more detail, I've spoken about this distributed energy resource connection guideline. The other areas we're interested to focus early would be in relation to new regulatory models. So the roadmap suggests the need for trialling of what's called TOTEX regulation, which is regulation that is based on setting a total expenditure base for the network business, rather than separating it into buckets of CapEx and OpEx. And the benefit of that kind of approach is that it removes any potential for capital, bias for capital projects or bias for assets over OpEx. And it's a model that's used in the UK, and it's certainly something that we think might be a really constructive change to the regulatory framework in Australia. The roadmap sets out a process for trials of that TOTEX framework in the early part of the decade with a view to implementing it by the end of the decade, recognising we've got 5-year regulatory cycles. I mentioned earlier the importance of visibility of distributed resources to AEMO, and we've got an agreement at the moment underway with AEMO and Energy Networks Australia about cooperating there to try and establish some options to clarify the interface between AEMO and the distribution networks, and try and make sure that we've got the information needed for the distribution networks to manage the grid reliably, but we're also assimilating that up and passing through information to the market operator that helps them to manage and forecast distributed resources in this rapidly changing environment. In relation to coordinated implementation, I probably touched on this, but we'll be looking to kind of showcase, if you like, the demonstration projects and release the kind of insights or learnings from those projects. This will build on the work we've done as a sector with ARENA in the Renewable Energy Stocktake program, which you can find on our website, that already includes some of those kinds of trials. But also just recognises, as we're all seeing, that there's such a plethora, a widespread amount of innovation and trials occurring, that one of the challenges is actually to make sure we don't duplicate that unnecessarily, and we actually share the insights of that work and don't duplicate what's being done overseas unnecessarily either. Moving on then, we're thinking about frameworks by which we can continue to engage stakeholders during the implementation of the roadmap and also create a process for ongoing progress monitoring through something like a transparent report that would occur on perhaps an annual basis that takes stock of where we are against the projections of the roadmap in relation to, say, technology change and technology adoption, but also those actions suggested in milestones in the roadmap. To sort of support that process, we'd like to explore options to create a stakeholder reference group or groups which help to guide our implementation activities and projects in the roadmap. And we've obviously benefited from a collaborative approach in the roadmap development to date. We'd want to try and establish that in an ongoing way as we go to the implementation stage as an industry. I think everyone's very conscious of the fact that we've got a work program underway through the Finkel Review, which is going to advise COAG Energy on a blueprint for energy security and security in the NEM in coming months. And so we're wanting to make sure that we can adjust our approach to the roadmap implementation to be informed by the findings of the Finkel Review, but also look to sort of support, if you like, those constructive areas of change in the same way that we've been interacting with that review panel and its secretariat over recent months. We'd like to sort of keep that momentum going forward. In terms of next steps, and this is probably the final message as part of this webinar for you, we are looking at an implementation plan that will help us to progress the roadmap in a kind of structured way, focusing on the things that really matter in those key flagship activities. And we expect in coming months to be able to provide more information to participants that have been involved in the roadmap program. For those of you on the call, on the webinar, and for those of you that have been on our stakeholder database through this process, we'll be making sure we distribute that widely and keep you closely informed of how we're intending to go forward there. I think you've probably picked up that there is a wealth of information available on our website, both the final report, but also the supporting library of materials. And we'll also be releasing this webinar in the form of video recording and the slides after its completion. As I mentioned earlier, we'll turn now to trying to address any outstanding questions before we close, but we will also report back in written form on any of those questions that we don't get time to address today. So Paul, I don't know if while I've been covering this final section, you've identified the next step in terms of the next question that you want to go back to, but I think we're in a position now to go to any final questions.
Yeah, we had a question on the mapping that I showed earlier. It says if solar penetration can only be 40% back to the grid, then there would be a massive increase in energy infrastructure requirements to absorb the 23 gigawatts of extra solar in 2017. So just to clarify that, the map doesn't mean that you can't export more than 40% back to the grid. The way we've done that calculation is that, and maybe it's best to give an example. Let's say we've got a 100 megawatt substation and we've got 40 megawatts of solar, rooftop solar installed. What we're saying is that there'll be days where the actual load in that substation is maybe only down in the 30s, and we're getting we're getting a great a peak in solar irradiation. So all of that solar is more or less working, and that's when you're going to get times where demand is less than the supply from solar. But probably for most of the other days, you'll have no problem absorbing that solar, but you'll have a few days where you have a potential reverse power flow. So I hope that sort of clarifies the question. We're not saying that you won't be able to export your solar. We're just saying that there is a risk somewhere around that 40% capacity penetration of solar of getting these reverse power flow events. Next one was for you, John.
Yeah. So the next one I think is from Terence, and I realise, by the way, that we're just over now our proposed finishing time. We'll probably just take a couple of more minutes and then close the webinar and come back to people with any further responses offline. The next question we have here is from Terence. Do you see any role for DC, direct current, and DC microgrids? And the short answer to you, Terence, is that we're certainly aware of the kind of discussion that's occurring and the technology providers that are recognising that many of the technologies are now direct current based, and you could certainly see the scope for microgrids to be established that rely on DC and effectively break that assumption that there's eventually going to have to be a transition to AC at any point in the system. We didn't do very detailed work around that as a prospective technology. It's something we acknowledge as part of the roadmap process. It is one of those things that it could be transformational depending on the rate at which microgrids are deployed and the potential for them to be taken up. To some extent, in terms of the big picture issues that the roadmap was looking at, we didn't see them as kind of changing the fundamental assessment we're making of the future and changing the assessment of what those no-regret actions are that need to be undertaken in the next 10 years. We would hope that if microgrids are more viable or more efficient in a DC model, that there's nothing we've done that kind of would prevent that from occurring and being taken up. We certainly want a framework that allows microgrids to play their economic role. The last question that we'll probably have time to deal with today is from Hugh G. Why is there no acknowledgement of the need for reform in network planning arrangements? And there are kind of some, that's a very broad area in terms of network planning, so there could be a few things that are in your mind about what you're referring to in relation to network planning. Certainly in relation to the network planning process that goes to assessing issues of the replacement or augmentation of the network over time and the annual planning reports that are produced by distribution networks and transmission networks. The roadmap is assuming that there is a fundamental change and reform in the way in which that activity is undertaken by networks. And you see this model there of relying on non-network solutions and distributed energy resources to participate and respond to incentives as being one of the key ways in which we're actually avoiding $16 billion in network expenditure between now and 2050. That will require a fundamental change to the network planning process. And we've also assumed as part of our discussion of regulatory reform that there would be changes to the regulatory model in relation to TOTEX expenditure regulation, as I was referring to earlier. So there are other questions about network planning that you might have in mind in relation to things like interconnection planning and the planning of the national transmission system. And we know these are things that are also relevant items for discussion and things that the Finkel review may consider as part of its work. And we'll participate in that in a constructive way. So look, thank you for everyone for your attendance today and for your patience as we've worked through the webinar. I realise that it may have been a bit clunky at times, including your ability to see the slides. and hopefully that'll be easier for you when you refer back to the material if we release it online in the next day or so. We'll have it up there just as soon as we can get the material loaded up and the video recording back. And we will come back to you in relation to those questions we didn't get time to address today. Can I, in addition to thanking you for attending, can I also take the time to thank all the people involved in the roadmap team from the CSIRO, the Energy Network business staff that were involved, the broad set of stakeholders from across customer representatives, new market actors, from government bodies, the regulators, policymakers. We've really appreciated the kind of contribution that's been made to this process by all of you. We know that this is just one part of a significant policy discussion that's occurring, and we wanted to thank you for your help to us in this process. With that, we'll thank you for your time today, and we'll close the webinar, and we look forward to talking to you soon in other channels. Thank you.